What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy goes head to head with daytime TV's most unfiltered voice? And neither one is willing to blink first. You're about to witness one of the most explosive clashes in talk show history. A showdown where old-school grit meets modern media firepower. Where decades of earned respect collide with sharp-tongued arrogance. This isn't just a celebrity interview gone sideways. This is the moment Clint Eastwood reminded the world why you never pick a fight with a man who's stared down the world for over 60 years. Subscribe and drop your take in the comments, because once this begins, you're going to find yourself choosing sides fast. It all started that morning, behind the scenes at The View. The studio buzzed with anticipation. Clint Eastwood, 94 years old, iconic, still razor sharp, was coming in to promote his new film. Already generating Oscar buzz, Joy Behar, known for her biting commentary and zero hesitation, had prepared for days, convinced she'd steer the conversation and challenge Clint like no one else had. The audience was packed, electric, sensing something more than just another promo segment. Clint walked on set with that quiet, deliberate stride. Dressed in a simple dark suit, his presence spoke louder than words. He took his seat across from the panel, calm, grounded, unshakable. Joy leaned in first, eyes glinting with the kind of mischief regular viewers knew spelled confrontation. "Clint Eastwood," she said with that signature smirk, "welcome to The View. I've got to admit, I'm surprised you agreed to come on. Let's be honest, our audiences probably couldn't be more different." The Clint's eyes narrowed, just slightly, a flicker, barely visible, but unmistakable to anyone who's seen his films. "Well, Joy," he replied, voice low and steady, "I've always believed in talking to people with different views. That's how you learn." Joy's smile tightened. "Interesting," she said, the tone already sharper. "Because from your movies and your politics, you come off as someone who prefers things simpler. Strong, silent, shoot-first types. That kind of worldview." The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. This was escalating fast. Clint didn't flinch, his gaze fixed on her unwavering. Then, softly, "You might be confusing movies with real-life, Joy. And in my experience, the loudest voices tend to say the least." A ripple ran through the crowd. Joy straightened, her gestures growing more animated. "So now we're getting the cowboy wisdom. Tell me, Clint, what exactly qualifies you to lecture anyone on what matters? You've spent your life playing cops and cowboys." A Clint didn't miss a beat. "And you've spent yours playing a character too. The difference is, I know when the cameras stop rolling." The tension thickened. The other host shifted uncomfortably, but Joy leaned back, voice rising. "Excuse me. Are you suggesting I'm not authentic? That I'm putting on some kind of act? I've been speaking truth to power for decades, while you've been playing pretend." The Clint's expression didn't change, but his posture did. Straighter, calmer, focused. "I'm suggesting you might want to listen more and lecture less. You invited me here as a guest, not a prop for your political theater." A Joy bristled. "Political theater. This is called journalism, Clint. Maybe you're not used to real questions. Maybe you're just used to softball interviews where people bow down because you're a so-called legend." The studio went dead silent. Clint's voice dropped to a chilling calm. "I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between journalism and performance. Journalists ask questions to find truth. You ask them to hear yourself speak." Joy's face flushed. She turned to the camera, then back to Clint, her outrage now tinted with panic. "I can't believe this. You come on our show and insult not just me, but the entire profession of journalism. This is exactly the arrogance I'd expect from someone who's been surrounded by yes men for 50 years. 60, Clint corrected, quiet but firm. "And in those 60 years, I've learned something. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. You might want to remember that." The silence that followed was suffocating. Joy glanced at her co-hosts, searching for backup, but found only tense, uncertain stares. In the control room, producers hesitated. Do they cut to commercial or let it ride? Sensing the moment slipping, Joy launched one final volley. You know what, Clint? Your real problem is women like me. Strong women. You come from a time when we were expected to sit down and stay quiet. And now that we're loud, you can't handle it. For the first time, Clint smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that, in his films, came right before everything went south. Joy, he said, leaning forward just slightly. I've worked with some of the strongest women in this town. Meryl Streep, Frances McDormand, Hilary Swank. The difference is, they use their strength to build, not tear others down. They don't confuse being loud with being strong. And with that, the studio was stunned into stillness. Joy's mouth opened, then closed, momentarily stunned by the comparison to women like Meryl Streep and Hilary Swank. But instead of retreating, she doubled down, the defiance in her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you dare lecture me about strong women, she snapped, her tone turning shrill. A few audience members shifted in their seats, visibly uneasy. You think dropping a few names makes you some kind of feminist ally? Those women had to survive in your system. They played by your rules. Clint stayed calm, but his voice hardened, like steel under pressure. My system. I've directed and produced films that gave women leading roles when Hollywood was still treating them like props. What exactly have you built, Joy, besides a platform to complain about everyone else's work? Joy's laugh was bitter, almost a bark. What have I done? I've spent my life fighting for women's rights, for social justice, while you've made a career glorifying toxic masculinity. Your characters solve problems with fists and threats, just like you're doing right now. The accusation lingered like smoke in the air. Clint leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, but chilling. You think this is intimidation? I haven't raised my voice. I haven't threatened anyone. I've answered your questions, with honesty. If that feels threatening to you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Joy turned toward the camera, her voice theatrical now, as if trying to salvage the moment. This is what I'm talking about, folks. This is how powerful men shut down women. Not with yelling, but with presence, with status, with that smug persona designed to make us feel small. Nobody's making you feel small but yourself, Clint said evenly. You opened this interview with condescension. You turned it into a confrontation. And now you're upset I'm not playing the part you wrote for me. The tension on set was suffocating. Whoopi Goldberg finally spoke up, her voice soft and cautious. Maybe we should talk about Clint's new project, the reason he's here. But Joy wasn't done. Her eyes were wild now, her voice climbing again. No. I think this is more important. I think our viewers deserve to see the real Clint Eastwood. Not the cowboy, not the cop, the man behind the myth. But Clint turned to her dead on. You want to know who I really am? He said, voice steady. I'm a man who spent his life learning his craft, respecting colleagues, telling stories that matter. I treat people with dignity, until they show me they don't deserve it. He paused, then leaned forward. What about you, Joy? Who are you when the cameras aren't rolling, when outrage isn't part of the script? The question landed like a gut punch. Joy's face flickered. Shock, then anger, then something close to fear. She glanced around the room as if looking for backup, but her co-hosts sat frozen. So did the audience. I'm someone who asks hard questions, she said finally, her voice thinner than before. Someone who holds people accountable. Accountable for what? Clint asked, leaning in. Having a different opinion. Not agreeing with your worldview. Not being impressed by your performance. For perpetuating harm. Joy snapped, regaining her momentum. For making films that glorify violence and outdated masculinity. For being part of a system that sidelined women and minorities for decades. The Clint nodded slowly, like he was genuinely considering her words. You know what's interesting about that? he said. "It tells me you've never really watched my films. If you had, you'd know many of them are about the cost of violence. About broken men, trying to redeem themselves. You'd know I've cast women and actors of color in powerful, complex roles. Long before it was trendy, I've seen enough," Joy snapped, cutting him off. "I don't need to watch every movie to know what you represent." Clint smiled, not smug, not triumphant, just tired. "And there it is," he said. "You're attacking me without understanding my work. Criticizing stories you haven't even heard. Judging me on assumptions and stereotypes. Isn't that exactly what you claim to fight against?" Joy's face flushed a deeper red. She was trapped, and she knew it. But instead of retreating, she went for the kill. "Don't try to flip this. I know exactly what you are. You're a relic. A leftover from a time when men could say and do whatever they wanted, without consequences. Well, those days are over. That brand of masculinity doesn't belong in a civilized world." The words cracked like a whip. Gasps echoed through the studio. Even the other hosts recoiled from the venom. Clint sat there in silence for a long, heavy beat. Then, in a voice so quiet it drew the room in closer, he spoke. "My type of masculinity. You mean the kind that treats people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. That waits to speak until there's something worth saying. That believes you earn your place with talent and discipline, not noise and outrage." The Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Clint wasn't finished. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, as if every movement was a message. His full height and quiet presence dominated the studio like a storm about to break. Clint Eastwood didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer weight of his calm authority was louder than any shout. "You know what's actually unwelcome in a civilized society, Joy," he said, his tone firm but composed. "People who use their platform to push ignorance. People who attack others with lazy stereotypes and pretend it's insight. People who confuse being obnoxious with being right." The studio froze. No movement. No reaction, just stillness. Joy scanned the room, searching for even a hint of backup, from her co-hosts, from the audience, but found only blank stares and uncomfortable silence. She had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Her composure cracked, desperation showing through the confident mask. Yet instead of backing down, she doubled down. The fatal mistake. "You don't get to lecture me on hatred," she snapped, her voice uneven. "You've built a career glorifying violence and revenge. Your movies are power fantasies for men too afraid to face their emotions. And now you want to intimidate me just like your characters do on screen." Clint didn't move. He stood still, hands at his sides, unmoved. And then, after a long, excruciating pause, he spoke. "I've been making films for over 60 years, he said quietly. "Hundreds of actors, directors, crews. Never once have I needed to yell. Never once have I used intimidation. You know why? Because real authority doesn't come from volume or fear. It comes from respect. And respect is earned through honesty, consistency, and treating people like they matter." Joy's hands trembled slightly. She gripped her chair tighter, trying to steady herself. "Oh, so now you think standing over me makes you righteous," she said bitterly. "You think your name and your height let you talk down to me." "I'm not talking down to you," Clint replied, unshaken. "I'm speaking to you directly. Something you seem to be struggling with. You've spent this whole conversation trying to trap me in your narrative. Some caricature of what you think I am. But I'm not going to play that part." The studio remained paralyzed. Producers in the control room debated muting the feed. Co-hosts stared blankly, unsure if they should intervene or just let it burn. Joy's voice pitched higher, now bordering on frantic. "This is exactly what I expected from you. A man who crumbles when challenged by a woman. You've been worshipped so long you can't even recognize accountability." Clint's eyes narrowed just slightly, a flicker of the steel that made him iconic. But his voice stayed calm. "You keep saying I can't handle being challenged," he said. But you haven't challenged me, Joy. You've attacked me. There's a difference. A challenge comes with questions, ideas, arguments. You came with accusations and outrage, hoping something would stick. Joy turned toward the camera, her voice rising again. America, do you see this? This is how the patriarchy works. They flip it on you. Make you the problem just for calling them out. The only one making you look unreasonable is you. Clint replied evenly. You invited me here. Then you spent the whole time trying to tear me down, while admitting you haven't even watched my work. You've judged me on assumptions, not facts. That's not journalism. That's not even conversation. That's just sad. The word sad struck like a blow. Joy flinched. Her face shifted rapidly, from defiant to wounded to furious. Don't you dare call me sad, she hissed. I've spent decades fighting for justice, for women's rights. I've used my voice to hold people like you accountable. Clint sat down slowly, deliberately. His eyes locked on hers. You talk about speaking truth to power, he said. But what truth have you brought today? You've accused me of things I've never said. You've dismissed stories you've never seen. That's not truth. That's prejudice. Joy's breathing quickened. The mask was gone now, no polish, no control. Just raw panic. I don't need to watch every movie to know what you represent, she said bitterly. You're the symbol of toxic masculinity in America. A symbol, Clint repeated quietly. Not a person. Not someone with thoughts or history or complexity. Just a target. That's the problem, Joy. You don't see people. You see symbols you can shout at. And for the first time, Joy had no comeback. She looked around the room, grasping for backup, but found only downcast eyes and silent hosts who had stopped nodding along. You're trying to make this about me, she said, her voice trembling. But it's about you. You've taught generations of men that stoicism and violence are the only answers. The Clint leaned forward just slightly, his voice now softened but still razor-sharp. I've told stories about men broken by violence. Men learning connection, redemption, community. I've made films about cost, loss, growth. You just never bothered to look. If you'd actually watch them, Clint said calmly. Instead of reacting to what you think they represent, maybe you'd understand. I've seen enough. Joy snapped, though the fire in her voice was already flickering out. No, Clint replied, steady and unshaken. You've seen what you wanted to see, filtered through your own bias. You've decided who I am based on your politics, not based on anything I've actually said or done. The Joy stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. I don't have to sit here and be lectured. This is my show. I don't have to tolerate being attacked by someone who represents everything I've fought against. Clint raised an eyebrow. Your show. I thought it was called The View, not The Joy Show. Maybe that's the problem. The comment hit like a hammer. Perfectly timed. Devastatingly accurate. Joy's face turned white, then flushed red. She looked around the studio, co-host silent, audience stunned, as the weight of her isolation began to settle in. You know what? Joy hissed, voice trembling. I've had enough. You came on this show to ambush me, to humiliate me in front of my audience. Clint didn't move. His expression remained calm. I came here to talk about my work, maybe have a thoughtful conversation. You turned it into a spectacle. You threw the first punch. I just chose not to duck. Your honesty is just another kind of aggression. She fired back, but even she didn't believe it anymore. And your aggression. Clint leaned forward slightly. That's just fear, Joy. Fear that someone might challenge your worldview, and you won't have a pre-scripted line to fall back on. Joy turned to the producers off camera, her voice cracking. Are we seriously letting this continue? Are we really giving him the platform to hijack our show? But the producers didn't move. No one did. They were watching live television history, and they knew it. Clint stood slowly. I've said what I came to say. He turned to Joy one last time. Maybe one day, You'll actually watch my films with an open mind. You might be surprised what you find. Don't you dare walk off this set! Joy barked, now fully unhinged. We're not done. Turned. His voice was quiet but sharp as steel. Yes, we are. You ended this the moment you chose to perform instead of engage, to assume instead of ask, to attack instead of listen. This isn't an interview anymore. It's a tantrum. And I don't participate in tantrums. He unclipped his mic slowly, with total composure. Joy watched in frozen horror as the realization hit her. Clint Eastwood, one of the most respected names in Hollywood, was walking away from her show because of her. You don't just leave the view, she said weakly. People don't walk away from me. Clint handed his mic to a stunned assistant and looked back one final time. People with self-respect do. Silence. Deafening. Joy stood in the center of the set, humiliated and exposed. The other hosts sat frozen. The audience stared in awe. As Clint reached the edge of the stage, he turned to the camera, addressing the viewers directly. To anyone watching, remember this: real strength doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to win every argument. It just needs to stand. Firmly, quietly, and with integrity. Thank you for your time. And with that, he walked off the set. The studio was in shambles. The host had lost control. The audience had watched her unravel in real time. Clint hadn't just walked away from a toxic exchange. He'd walked away with his dignity fully intact, leaving Joy Behar standing in the wreckage of her own making. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, silent, stunned, defeated. That's the power of calm under fire. Sometimes the most devastating response isn't to fight. It's to refuse to play. Clint Eastwood didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stood his ground, and in doing so, reminded everyone watching what real strength looks like. So what do you think? Did Joy get what she deserved? Or did Clint go too far? Let me know in the comments.